Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Books with Tanisha. I'm so excited to welcome our next guest, which is Zaretta Hammond. I feel so excited to welcome her personally because I had a chance to work with her in the school district where I was helping lead some of this really amazing work. And to bring in the Zaretta Hammond to talk about this in person was an amazing boost for me and for the work that we're doing in our district. But it's really, the thing that's probably even more important is to kind of hear her talk about the book that she wrote, and just lots of things we'll be talking about today, and the why behind it. So I want to introduce you, Zaretta Hammond. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tanisha, for having me. I am so excited to talk about this book, as always, and to talk about with you. Yeah, and everybody out there who will be watching this.
Yay, thank you. All right, so we have three questions. Usually always the same three questions, but the conversation always feels a little bit different. So I was just talking to you before we started recording that this book was published in 2014. And if you walk into any school that is really about doing any kind of equity-driven work or equitable instruction, you're going to see this book still prominently displayed on many shelves, if not in the middle of many book groups. It's still very relevant in 2023. So tell me, why is this the book that you wrote, and why is it still important now? Why is it still relevant?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think the story I share with people about why this book, and the book came about not because I set out to write a book. I actually had started, when I left the classroom, I taught writing, and I started to coach teachers, and that's why I left. I was asked to come out and help with some teacher, PLC inquiry stuff. And the way I had started training and supporting teachers was the way in which I ran my classroom. When I taught writing, I taught composition. And what I realized was when I taught writing, no amount of red ink was going to get the learner to change their writing habit or to better understand how to avoid that run-on sentence or how to level up their writing. And I realized I have to get them to see what they don't see. And I have to help them know what to do when they see it. So one of the things that I did was to teach teachers how to do that, how to train their own eye to see it. And what do you do when you see it? Because it's really heartbreaking for a teacher to see where the student is struggling and not really know themselves how to coach that student to a higher level.
Yeah.
So I have been coaching teachers in this way for a long time. Probably by that time it had been 10, almost 15 years. Okay. And every few years, a group of teachers would roll up on me. I mean, quite literally, like, you need to write this down. I'm like, I'm working, I got enough to do, children to help, teachers to support. But there was one really aggressive group, and this was in the San Francisco Bay Area. They were like, we ain't letting you leave this. So I'm like, okay, I will just write it down and then we can get back to business. Well, that's what I did. I just took the time. My daughter was a senior in high school. Now she's been out of college three years, how long that's been.
Yeah.
And the rest is history, because what people weren't talking about is instruction. And we're still not talking about it in the depth that we need to, particularly in light of the pandemic and coming on the other side of the school closures, and now students have unfinished learning, and more than ever we are going to need to accelerate their learning. So helping students do that means giving them the skills so they have that greater agency. It's not just voice and choice. I hear that a lot, like it's just become like this little mantra with no real teeth behind it, no real action behind it. But I also see that a lot of classrooms have like a pedagogy of compliance. So just, you can't will students do it. They literally have to step into it so that they learn how to learn these new skills.
Yeah, I love when you talk about instruction. I love when you talk about that, because there's that kind of underlying challenge. Okay, and I'm telling you, and we're sharing it. Now, what do we do with it, right?
Yes. My tagline is information is not transformation.
Mm,
And, well, a lot of people are reading the book, but they don't know what to do with the book. And then what I see is a lot of cherry picking. Um,
mhm,
like, oh, we'll read it and we'll cherry pick the strategies, but they kind of leave on the, on the floor, on the cutting room floor. If you think about, films and editing, they'll
mhm,
leave out the good scenes, right? Or the conceptual understanding that why are you actually doing that? And they'll actually apply, erroneous or thinking or misconceptions to this strategy, thinking because I'm doing the strategy,
mhm.
I'm being culturally responsive.
Right.
So they are not understanding what that is, or they'll just be in the realm of relationships.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think the instructional part is so important.
I feel like you're almost answering the second part, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I want to think about what is your favorite part of this book and what do you hope readers are going to get from it? Because you talked about what you feel like people are missing from it. What do you hope readers are going to get from it? What's your favorite part?
My favorite part is chapter 8, because that's where we get into the nitty gritty of instruction. So
Yeah.
anybody knows me, I've been to several conferences over the years, and people will come up to me and like, oh, I just love your book. And I love talking to people, not just about my book, but just about instruction and how do we empower students. And they'll say, yeah, I'm using your book, and they'll have the book with me and with them. And, and I'll look at it and there are no tabs, the
Mhm,
spine is barely broken.
mhm,
And there'll be, if there are some, post-its, it'll be up in front. And I'm
mhm.
like, if you have not highlighted chapter 8, we need to just stop talking to each other right about now. But if I see somebody and that thing is like tabbed up, and they will always apologize, I'm so sorry. I'm like, oh, do you know this is the book I want to sign? Because it
Yeah.
means you're using it. So my favorite part is definitely chapter 8. And the setup that a lot of people don't understand is I actually structured the book in a way that it is cumulative and a compound effect, meaning if you start with a conceptual understanding, right, Ferreri's idea of praxis, with the opening chapters, when you get to chapters 5, 6, 7, now we're in informed action. How do you prepare so students actually can take ownership?
Mhm,
That's the learning partnership, the alliance part. So alliance, that part, which I talk about in chapters 6 and 7, lead into chapter 8, because if you don't have that, you're going to have to push the student into the zone of proximal development. That's why the trust is so important. But I
yeah.
see people kind of taking it apart. I'll go to conferences and or have workshops, and people will say, oh yeah, we read that in our PD. And I'm like, well, how much have you read? Oh, we read chapter 5. So
Yeah.
somebody literally copied chapter 5, and they don't get the foundational stuff in the beginning, and they haven't gotten to the instructional stuff in
Mhm.
chapter 8. So it's kind of a waste, because then those are people that are probably doing PLC light, and
Right.
certainly doing, culturally responsive light, whatever that might look like. And then people will say that, but they're slapping the term culturally responsive on everything. So I don't know what the
Yeah.
hell that means anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and particularly when you're not making it about the instructional piece, but just trying to cherry pick strategies. Just doing a thing
Right.
doesn't mean students are responding.
Yeah. I feel like when people say, like, I believe in the warm demander, approach, like, okay, I read Zaretta Hammond, I got it. I got warm demander. I mean, I feel like I hear that probably more than anything else. And that's interesting. That's why I asked what your favorite part was. I think there's pieces that we definitely are missing as readers. And I'm not going to tell people what chapter 8 says. You got to get the book for yourself.
Right, that's
Read
right.
it.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, I think you're onto something, because again, warm demander has been overused. People are talking about it, the warm strict of teach like a champion. People have all these ways that they're looking at it. And if they're not looking at it through a collectivist lens, then they don't understand that the original research that was done with Alaskan Native students, when they looked at teachers that were successful with a particular group of students who were now coming from the villages, moving into urban areas and having to go to middle school and high school and elementary, those same group of students were successful with one particular teacher in middle school, but not successful with a different teacher in the same building. And researchers came up there and started to look at why this was happening. Even Lisa Delpit cut her teeth around her work in Alaska with Alaska Native students. So that's where that research around that, and it's got two dimensions. It's personal warmth, right? And active demandingness. So a lot of people reduce it to tough love. So if I'm just tough with you about getting your assignments in, but what active demandingness is the idea that I am not satisfied with the work that's being put in front of me because I know you can do better. Not just because you're not following the rules, but baby, you are so smart. And I think you can do this. So then what happens is it's not just a pep talk, it's the teacher and the student who have built an alliance through their learning partnership now say, let's take it to the next level. Kind of like a dojo. So the sensei doesn't just say, hey, do the kata, I'm going to be in my office when you're done. No, he gives feedback. He gives encouragement. He's there, right? They all work together as a community who are trying to level up their skills. There's deliberate practice. There's productive struggle. All of these with sensei right there to be that coach. What teachers are not doing is coaching students to higher levels of cognition, to higher levels of rigor. And this is what's disturbing to me is that's the purpose of culturally responsive instruction, but we've made it something else.
Yeah. Wow, you just said like a whole lecture right there. Like I should be taking notes.
Don't even get me started.
All right, let's go to our last question, which is really about two things. First, want to know what you're reading, because I think whatever you're reading, people are going to want to read too. So what are you reading right now?
I don't know if they'll want to read this. There are a couple. One, I'll just say really quickly, because I have a tendency to read outside of education. I read very few education books. There are a few that come across my path that are not necessarily directly related. They don't have equity in their title, right? But I do think they relate to instruction. So at some point, I'll share some of those with you. But one is BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits. That's a really great book because what it really talks about is how we can develop habits, right? We build habits and then habits build us. So the idea that we want students to level up their learning is not just, I want you to level up your learning. I have to teach you new cognitive habits. I need to, and that doing those cognitive habits repeatedly leads to myelination. It leads to the growth of your schema. It leads to literally more gray matter through the growth of the dendrites. But a lot of teachers don't do that. It's their idea of instruction is covering content. Right. So that's one of the things. And again, it's not going to say anything about education, but it is going to talk about how we actually create habits so we can get better at something. That's one. The other I'm reading, which nobody's going to run out and get it because I am such a neuroscience nerd. This is called Choke, right? It says the author offers a fascinating look at the science of why so many of us collapse under pressure. And I love this because it is about all areas, whether it's test taking in schools, golf swings, performing in front of an audience. But the author really makes this point that in addition to, encouraging students to have a growth mindset, all these other kind of SEL type things, we also have to help them get past their choke points. So the fact is we've got to reframe errors as information. We've got to take an inquiry stance to see where am I getting stuck and help the student to be meta-strategic and metacognitive, right? Everybody just says metacognitive. But I can be thinking about my thinking. And if my thinking is low, guess what I'm thinking about? My low thinking. Thinking about your thinking doesn't level up your thinking.
Wow. Okay.
Right. But that's what we do. We want to be metacognitive.
Right.
Okay. We all just go sit around and think about how we can't do. And this is what I love about choke points. So I'm working on my next book.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm taking parts of chapter 8 and just kind of really trying to get into what's the portrait of a good information processor,
Okay.
to really start to interrupt this idea of the cognitive red line that I see in so many classrooms. Despite good things that the teacher knows how to do,
Yeah.
it's not helping students move from dependent learning to cognitively independent learning. We're
I don't
getting
think I've ever heard that term cognitive redlining. I love that.
yeah, and it's one that I have, I've heard the superintendent in Baltimore talk about educational redlining, and it caught my ear, and I went on down a rabbit hole or two, and people have talked about it. I had the pleasure of doing a panel webinar with some global educators, and they have been talking in South Africa about cognitive justice.
Hmm.
So all of these new ways, the World Bank organization put together a project by 2030. They want to end what they call learning poverty.
Hmm.
So everybody is really clear that despite all the money we're pouring into equity initiatives and whatnot,
Yeah.
learning poverty, cognitive redlining, resegregation in schools is happening,
Yeah.
particularly for our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students.
Mhm.
So the next book is really how do we take the ideas out of chapter 8, and everybody still should read chapter 8, but
Mhm.
actually using collaborative inquiry. How do we actually move students? What would that look like to move them from that dependent learning through their own choke points,
Mhm.
so that they can become good information processors? Because that's going to be the thing they can take with them from the current grade to the next grade. They'll never lose that. It's just like learning to read well. Once you learn to read well,
That's
whether
true.
you never read again, you don't lose that. You might
Yeah.
get rusty in your stamina, but you can always increase that,
Right.
And
Right.
this is the same thing. Once we teach students these learn how to learn skills, practice as habits, and kind of become cognitive structures in their brain and how they learn, it never goes away.
Yeah. This has been a really amazing interview. It really has. Like, I feel first just really grateful again to spend time with you. It's been a while. And again, like just to hear your brilliance in the breakdown in which you talk. I think there's a lot of things people should pay attention to. And it takes some time. Like, I would actually encourage people to go back and look at this again and kind of take some time to unpack it. I also want to encourage people to push like on your screen, and to go ahead and subscribe to this, because the goal is to get stories out to people and to encourage us all to read. You're right. Like, once you learn how to read and once you have those skills, like, you would continue that. And one way to build your stamina is to continue adding new things into your schema. So let's broaden that. Zaretta Hammond, thank you.
You are so welcome. I so appreciate you and all you do for helping us level up.
Oh, take care. Stay here, but take care.
All right.